now, because a lot of times when we have these meetings, I'm a little bit late starting the recording because I'm focused on the meeting and not the recording. In any event, I'm glad we can do these. Certainly, it facilitates getting information out to a lot of people, and certainly glad to see the number of participants that we have on board today. I hope everybody walks away with a little better understanding of where we're at this year and how we're balancing challenges to the system. My name is Eric Peterson. I'm the Operations Project Manager for the Willamette Valley Project, also for the Rogue Basin. We consolidated last October. A number of my staff are here on this call as well. Dustin Bankston is the Deputy Operations Project Manager. Christy Johnson is here, Senior Park Ranger, and does a lot of outreach work. Also, I see Selena Hart. Selena heads up our hydraulics and hydrology branch and leads the team of regulators for the Valley and the Rogue, and also did a lot of the work that you'll see in the slides today. Her team supported the modeling effort. Her boss I saw is here, Sean Eskelson, as well. Greetings, everybody. I see also we've got some folks from our office council here. Glad to have you here, Amanda. Let's go ahead and get started. Again, Eric Peterson, Operations Project Manager, and we're here to talk about the 2022 water year conservation season outlook here in the Valley. It has a lot of bearing on a lot of people. Water is really an important resource for us, and as we get closer to the conservation season, what we have and how we use it really matters. So today, we will talk a little bit about the system, why we're here, what we do, get an overview of hydrologic conditions, and look at weather and climate ahead. We'll talk project-specific operations by reservoir, what's happened in the past, what we see right now, and what we see ahead, at least as far ahead as we can see it. And then we'll also have time throughout for summary and questions. And again, a little footnote there, thanks to Selena and her team for prepping a lot of information for us. So Selena, thank you. All right, the Willamette Valley Project is a system of 13 dams that really developed between 1939 and 1969 for the purpose of providing flood risk management in the valley, as well as other purposes. But really, we're here to solve that #1 problem, and there are a number of other collateral benefits of this system and the way that it stores water, what it represents to the valley. And there's a snapshot of the 13 dams in the system. Again, that's why we're here. The Willamette and its tributaries flooded pretty frequently. And in the 30s and the 40s, Congress authorized us to study and solve this problem of frequent flooding. There was a fairly high flood of record, 1894, that's downtown Portland. And really flooding throughout the valley was pretty commonplace. And that has changed dramatically since this system has been constructed. The other purposes that we're authorized to manage for include hydropower and navigation, water quality, irrigation, water supply, of course, recreation, and environmental values, environmental stewardship, fish and wildlife. So I know that you all know that, that these authorizing purposes really represent, in some cases, many cases, competing demands. If we were solely to manage for flood risk management, or rather hydropower or water supply or recreation, then we would exclude sometimes other benefits of the system. And we don't. We do manage flood risk management principally in the wintertime as really our big constraint on the system. But we manage for other values, and it's a challenge to optimize those benefits. It's become increasingly challenging with the advent of listed species, listed fish in the system, and what they need and what we need to do to support their conservation and recovery. This is a typical forebay hydrograph. On the left axis, you can see elevation above sea level, and then on the bottom axis, you can see months of the year. And this really demonstrates what our strategy is for managing this system. Certainly where we are now, at the end of April, almost the beginning of May, we've been filling this system and our reservoirs individually since the beginning of February, and we're reaching the top of our conservation pool in ideal circumstances, so that that conservation storage can be used to provide water supply, to provide fish and wildlife benefits, water quality benefits, downstream over the course of the summer months, as well as irrigation benefits. And then upstream, we have the benefit of providing recreation on the reservoirs, which is really important to this system. At the end of the summer, again, ideal, we begin to take down the storage in the reservoir beginning in September after Labor Day, and pull that storage down so that we have available storage for flooding. And as you know, it starts to rain a lot more in September, and the heaviest rains fall in this system in November, December, January, and February. And that's when we have the most temporal storage available to capture the peaks off of the inflows, hold them back a little bit, let the tributaries and main stem drain a little bit and attenuate, and then release that storage. The challenge for our system always is that we can fill this system up in about 3 or 4 days, and it can take 3 or 4 weeks or more to attenuate. And so oftentimes I'm asked the question, hey, if you knew it was going to be dry, why didn't you hold back some of this rain that you had in January until a little later in the season? And I always encourage folks to recognize that our forecasts are really good about 3 days out, not so great about 10 days out. And beyond that, it's a little bit of guesswork in terms of what climate is going to do and what long-term forecasts do. So we can't cheat this risk curve, this water control diagram, the big large red line here, and we don't, because we don't want to fail our flood risk management mission. In April of 2019, we averted $2 billion almost in one storm event. And that storm event progressed something at the beginning of the week that was expected to be a storm, but relatively low volume event. 5 or 6 days later, we got almost 10 inches of precipitation across most of the valley. And the system itself, because it was mid-April when this storm hit, we were already 2/3 full. So that's just an example of the benefits of this system. And if we didn't have that storage available, we wouldn't have realized all of those averted damages. We would have experienced much more flooding. It's really important to us that we manage that well. So what's new in 2022? We'll talk a little bit about the water year. We had a very dry January, February, and March, and I've got some graphics to show that a little bit later on. Thankfully, we had a really wet April, and it produced some good results for our conservation season. And the trend that we've seen in recent years continued, where it was a little bit wetter to the north and a little bit drier to the south. We have this year some interim risk reduction measures in place. At Hills Creek, we're holding the water down, or the top of the conservation pool down about 10 feet. We won't even achieve that, and I'll go into why on that issue a little bit later. Lookout Point, similarly, we're not going to hit near the top of our conservation pool there for other reasons, but we have an interim risk reduction measure there of about 5 feet. Detroit is about 5 feet, and Cougar, we have gate tracking above the spillway sill. We have these interim risk reduction measures in place because of either hydrologic or seismic reasons. And we've got some studies in place to better understand what our risks are as the science evolves and we better understand risk. We manage accordingly. I heard a question earlier today about Detroit. We have done some pretty significant spillway gate repair work there, but we still have an interim risk reduction measure in place because we realized more recently, as we better understand the implications of a Cascadia subduction event, that there could be some failure modes related to that event if we had water all the way up on the spillway gates. So that measure is keeping Detroit about 5 feet lower than the top of the conservation pool. It still allows the marinas to float and the ramps to be functional, but it takes that risk of potential catastrophic failure and buys it down to a tolerable level. At COUGAR also, we have some questions about seismic vulnerabilities, and we're holding that reservoir a little bit lower for that reason. Also this year, we have some injunctive order measures as a consequence of litigation. And if you want to see those in detail, I've provided a link here that you can see on our Portland District website. If you just go to the Portland District Corps of Engineers website, it's pretty easy to find these links. You don't even have to have this exact link. Just go there. You can see all of the implications of the injunctive order measures and better understand them. Read them in detail and understand how we're implementing them. For us at Foster, it's going to mean a slightly delayed refill. Shouldn't affect the recreation season a whole lot. At Lookout Point, we will be using, and we are using, spillway gates for downstream fish passage right now, and using the water stored in Hills Creek to facilitate keeping Lookout Point at the right elevation so that we can use that spill. At COUGAR, there's a delayed refill as we're using regulating outlets for downstream fish passage. And at Fall Creek, we have a delayed refill as we're passing fish later into the spring. Current conditions, this is as of yesterday. Conditions obviously are not changed dramatically from this. Probably what's most noteworthy to me is that system storage is only about 58% full, which means we're down about 32%. And our couple of our biggest storage reservoirs, Lookout and Hills Creek, are low. That's a function both of our operation for fish passage, as well as the fact that south end of the valley was drier this winter than the north end of the valley. Detroit is looking pretty good, almost at rule curve, and while Fern Ridge shows 10% down, that's volume. Most of the volume in that reservoir is in the very top of that reservoir because it's a very shallow kind of reservoir that is a bit like a saucer. So we're only about a foot down, maybe even less than a foot down from the top of our conservation pool at Fern Ridge right now. For those of you who may not know, this diagram is easily found if you Google Willamette teacup diagram. You can see it, and if you click on any of these orange icons that represent dams, you can get a whole lot of data associated with each reservoir. It's a really handy tool, and it works generally really well. Going back to precipitation and thinking through what we've seen this water year, seasonal precipitation year to date, up to about a little earlier this week, has not been great. We've been somewhere between 50 and 90%, depending on where in the basin you are. North end of the basin, we've been at average or around average, or maybe even a little above average. And as you go to the south, a little bit below. As you look month to month, the month of February was really, really dry. The month of March was also dry. And again, April was well above average, and we did some catch up. Really interesting, some of this precipitation in April has come in the form of snow, both at lower elevation and on up. And that typically helps us in the over the course of the summer months as some of that melts off and provides a little bit more base flow over the course of the summer. It doesn't, influence the system in an incredible way in terms of getting it full fast, but it helps over the course of the summer months. Our refill season begins in February, and as you can see, most of the season it was unusually dry, and April, of course, really beneficial. This is a SNOTEL map. It shows snow water equivalent over the Cascades. Again, some at the high elevations, we've had pretty good snow water equivalent, some very high SNOTEL stations. Some further to the south, not quite as good, lower elevation, not quite as good in some cases. Just a lot of variability around the system. All of these data are available to you as well online through various sources. Right now, we're hanging at about 137% of median snow water equivalent. So that green line represents the median. The X there is typically when we peak, which is mid or late March, early April. We're peaking a little bit late, almost the beginning of May. It gives me hope for an uneventful fire season. I'm going to cross my fingers on that one. But as I said, it helps sustain base flow of the tributaries into the reservoirs a little bit later in the spring and early summer, and that helps us. And you can see, we're significantly above the median right now. Drought conditions, the diagram on the left is last year about this time, and you can see there's pretty widespread drought, but the exceptional drought was more limited last year than where we are this year. Central Oregon is certainly drier this year, and Northwest Oregon is a whole lot better this year than they were last year. Last year we were abnormally dry, and now we're not. The drought has receded for us just a little bit here in the Willamette Valley, but there are still places where we have severe, moderate, and abnormally dry conditions. Near-term outlook as we look forward, the 10-day forecast or so is moderate. Temperature as high as warming into the 50s and 60s. Lows pretty normal in the 40s. Precip, we expect rain really up through Monday, but pretty light rain. The quantities don't look like a whole lot. And then beginning Tuesday, really pretty dry Tuesday through Saturday ahead. Lots of variability on the snow elevation in the next 10 days, but it seems to be holding pretty well. And I've got a link there for you to the 10-day forecast on NOAA's site. It really provides an awful lot of graphical information, maps that show you temperatures, precip, quantities, and what to expect. It's worth a look. It's too much data to cram on one PowerPoint slide here. Looking ahead, climatologically, 30 to 45 days, here's what you see. Precip, we're going to be in all probability below average or leaning below average. And then temperatures looks like equal chances for us of above or below. Pretty normal conditions, it looks like, in May. All right, this is a bit of a complicated graphic here that shows last year's water supply about this time of the year, end of April.
Well,
and it
yeah,
shows
I just
yes. Our water supply. Somebody's got a hot mic out there. Shows our water supply at 50.
And then I sent, yeah, it's a little small.
Patrick,
And I sent
you have a hot mic.
and then I sent them.
All right. Thanks, Dustin. This year we're faring better over the course of the watershed in that we have 81% of average, which is good. The difference for us this year is because of the way that we're operating, we don't have quite as much storage available to us in the system because of the operations on the Middle Fork and COUGAR. And here you see the probability of what we'll see for flows over the course of the remaining spring at Salem. System storage is less than 1 million or less than 1,000 acre feet, and so that puts us in a deficit year for storage. The blue line represents the 50% non-exceedance probability, or what we most likely might expect, and the other lines are more the range of extremes. And as we move further into the conservation season, that delta between the red line on the bottom and the red line on the top tends to get tighter and tighter as we have more predictability around what's going to happen. I need to say there are a lot of caveats around our modeling, and our models are models. They're not perfect, and so they give us the best indication of what we can reasonably presume given the assumptions that we have. But they are models, and they're limited in their value, their predictive value. This is a model of flows through the summer predicted at Albany. It reflects a number of assumptions that include hitting temperature targets on the main stem Willamette. Same for Salem. These are our deficit flow threshold targets by time of the year or part of the season. And again, this is a model, and this will be a little bit smoother than what it actually shows here around these assumptions. For Hills Creek, you can see we're starting behind at Hills Creek. The 50% non-exceedance curve is really pretty low, and that's because of both drought and because of the way that we've been operating through the spring to meet water needs at Lookout Point and the Middle Fork for fish passage. Here's another diagram of the water control diagram, the 4-bay hydrograph at Hills Creek, along with some comparisons to past years. So thinking back, 2001 was a pretty tough water year, pretty bad drought that year. And we're ahead of that, or we were ahead of that. We're a little behind that right now. Looking at calendar year 2015, the aqua-colored line, we're behind that as well. We're a little bit behind 2021 at this point, and this is just an anomalous year because of the way that we're using water on the Middle Fork this year. And it looks like we're not going to be accessible via boat ramps at Bingham and at CT Beach Park. Here's Lookout Point. And the 50% non-exceedance forecast there still looks pretty low. Lookout spillway gates are being used, and we're trying to keep that water at or above, slightly above the sill to be able to spill. If you drive by there now, you can see spill at Lookout. In comparison, again, this is an anomalous year. We are in better shape this year than we have been in past, but we are staying just above the spillway crest. Again, how we got there this year is a function of both drought and our water management decisions. And we do expect to be above signal point, I think, most of the season, which is good. Fall Creek, again, we had delayed refill. You can see that in the hydrograph here, where the reservoir was kept low until about mid-March. Thankfully, we got some precip in March, later March and April, and we began filling a little bit very recently. And you can see the 50% non-exceedance curve here. Again, that operation was intended to facilitate fish passage at Fall Creek. And here's some history with respect to Fall Creek. You can see our calendar 22 hydrograph in the red, and the upper and lower bounds there of our forecast. Access looks like it will be viable at the North Shore ramp through the summer, but other accesses won't be usable there. Cottage Grove, 50% non-exceedance curve, still some range of variability there. And you can see what the modeling looks like there. Looks like Wilson Creek should be available and Lakeside pretty much through the season. At DORENA, doesn't look too bad. We're going to hit the conservation pool a little later in May and facilitate accessibility through Harms and Baker Bay pretty much through the season. Fern Ridge, we're within 1 foot of filling right now, and inflows are still, I think, well above outflows, and it looks like it'll be a pretty good recreation season there at Fern Ridge this year. I often get questions from people at Fern Ridge who, in recent years, we've had a couple of years that have been tough, and I just want to show what the precipitation, the inflows have looked like. Represents the green line, the bright green line here. The aqua line on the bottom represents our outflows, and these data are all available on our teacup diagram. Also, the brighter blue line represents our actual hydrograph. So you can see we're approaching the top of the conservation pool now. And you can see what we've done since late January. Our inflows have been pretty low. And in late January, we necked our outflows down to about 30 cubic feet per second, which is barely a trickle. And we've held that low since that point in time. And so had we had bigger storm events come in later in the spring, we would have both been able to capture them up to the water control diagram, but above that, we would have had to open up our outflows a little bit more and release water. This has been a particularly dry year in the south end of the valley, and I think we're fortunate to be where we are with Fern Ridge this year. And there's Fern Ridge in comparison to some of the recent years, 2001 being in the lighter blue, 2015 being in the aqua green color, and 2021 being in the darker blue. It looks like we're going to have a better season than what we had last year, and that's a good thing. Cougar, special operation there. We do not know with absolute certainty when we're going to begin refilling at Cougar. We're working with our partner agencies to make that determination. But the median hydrograph, or the 50% non-exceedance curve, reflects a May 4th start. So this modeling, we had to make some assumptions, and we assumed May 4th. And this operation, again, the delayed refill has been to be able to pass fish through the regulating outlets there to keep them close to the surface. Again, an anomalous water year for us, given the operations that we have going on. You can see how it compares to other water years. As we get into the season, it looks close to 2001 in terms of how the conservation season plays out over the course of the summer. And it won't be accessible from ramps this year. Blue River will be used for some flow augmentation. We'll get close to the top of the conservation season, or conservation elevation in late May, early June. And it doesn't look like a particularly bad year. Certainly a better year than 2001, and probably better than 2021, although TBD how that water will be used to augment flows on the main stem. Green peter will be used to fill Foster a little bit later in the season. You can see Foster will begin filling in mid-May and fill very quickly from green peter. That'll have some bearing on the rate and extent of refill at green peter, but should be an acceptable year at both locations. Certainly looks like we have the potential to have a better water year there than in 2001 and probably in 2015 as well. Looks like Whitcomb should be available through much of the year, and Thistle Creek through all of the year. And Foster is Foster. It is principally a re-regulation facility for green peter, and it will be pretty much full through the summer season. Detroit. So Detroit is limited by the interim risk reduction measure. You see that in the hydrograph here. And as most folks familiar with that reservoir, the North Santiam, know that we maintain flows downstream to support habitat. It looks like, in all probability, we're going to have a pretty good year at Detroit. We are limited, that top 5 feet. We won't achieve that because of the risk reduction measures, but we'll be able to hold on to a pretty good pool most of the summer, and that's reflected in when you look at what the model shows versus what the boat ramp elevations are. Certainly a much better water year than 2015, and way better than 2001 and even 2021. For the most part, it's advantageous to the system and to fish to be able to get that reservoir elevation up past the spillway gate sill and hold it there so that we can manage for temperature downstream, which is really important for anadromous fish, for salmon and steelhead. So a bit of a summary. We do have a unique year because of fish operations in the system. April rains have really made a difference for us this year. Our constraints remain tight, but we're optimistic for recreation. There are opportunities in those reservoirs that are most heavily used for recreation. Looks to be pretty good opportunities this year. Fall Creek, the delay of refilling Fall Creek is going to have some effect on the reservoir for recreation. And then Cougar, Lookout, and Hills Creek, all reservoirs that are often used for augmenting for main stem targets, will be impacted a little bit. Detroit, Fern Ridge, Cottage Grove, and DORENA, as well as Foster and Green Peter look pretty much okay. Other considerations, you know, on the main stem, we may be a little more focused on fish needs in the tributary and temperature on the main stem than minimum flows, but that's an adaptive process that tends to work itself out over the course of the conservation season. That storage deficit that we have, because we're not starting with full storage, may have consequences to how we use our remaining storage on the system, and that will play out adaptively over the course of the year. Again, we see another year where there's a dry pattern, where it's been dry in the south and a little wetter to the north. Our biggest storage reservoirs are in the south, and so that has bearing on the availability of water for the system to do things like augment for main stem targets and for temperatures. When we compare to medians, we're comparing not over history, but really over the last 30 years or so. And if you think about 20 of those last 30 years, you know, we've had some dry years over the last 20 years. So there is a bit of a shift, at least anecdotally, for what we're seeing towards a drier trend. And we're comparing our data this year to drier medians. People often ask, hey, how can we influence outcomes? How can we shape the way that you guys look at science and trade-offs? And we do have an EIS, an environmental impact statement, underway that is looking at alternatives. And you can find out more about that by going to the Portland District website and finding the EIS information there. There's a button, a link to it right on the front page, and you can find out more about the scope of that evaluation and analysis and how you can participate. We do anticipate a draft EIS coming out this fall, and if you're really interested in the system, that's a really great way to better understand the trade-offs and what we're contemplating for the future of the system. So that's my presentation today. I told you I was gonna stop partway through it, and I didn't. I apologize for that. But I'm ready to take your questions now, and hope that I can give you some answers. Christy, can you facilitate that? And do I need to take you off of mute, or can you do that yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I certainly can. Thank you.
Okay. Well, there's really only one question in there in the chat, and they want to know why we don't publish the long-term forecasts until on our, the TCUP website, so that public knows what to expect for the reservoirs. Can you explain that?
That's a really good question, and I'll take a swing at this one and then offer to Sean or to Selena. But our long-term forecasts, particularly in the winter and spring, are really subjective or variable. There's a wide range of variability around them, and conditions change. We could have, unlikely, but thinking back to April of 2019, we had a storm event on Monday. The prediction was maybe about 1.5 inches or 2 inches of precip coming in. By Wednesday, it was more like 3 to 5 inches. By Friday, it was 6 to 8 inches, and again, we realized 10 inches of precip in that storm across the basin. So it changed very quickly, and sometimes folks will look at a forecast and believe that to be absolutely the way it's going to be, and it turns out not to be. So as we get closer to the summer season, where the weather doesn't change a whole lot, where we have more predictive validity over our modeling, that's when we tend to talk about it, because we know more of what's going to happen. We have more confidence in the forecast at that point in time. Sean or Selena, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, that was really great, Eric. Really, we are using the River Forecast Center's water supply volume forecast, which is variable at this time, and they start getting more confidence as we get closer to the summer months. And our models are using climatology and historical period record data, and so it's not going to be as accurate as looking at the real-time forecast. And we adapt to the real-time conditions, and so this is a snapshot in time, and each day, technically, the forecast will change as that water supply volume changes. So that is a lot of why that isn't put out there.
Okay, there's another question on the chat. What are the reservoir management priorities in order? And, well, there's a guess there: flood control, recreation, fisheries.
You know what, it's a good question. It really depends. In the winter months during flood season, obviously flood risk management, protecting lives and property is our #1 priority. I would say that the remaining priorities, especially during the conservation season, really are around fisheries, water quality, water supply, and recreation is also important, but it's optimization of those benefits, and it is a balance within the authorities that we have and within the bounds of legal compliance.
Well, that is the last question in the chat. Is there anybody else that wants to jump in and ask a question? Okay, another question just popped up. Are we expecting these reservoir levels to be the new normal?
Brett, that's a really good question, and I don't have a definite answer to that. What I can tell you is every water year is different, and that everything tends towards, over time, towards averages. I do think the averages are getting, I think we're seeing more variability. The April atmospheric river event that we had was pretty unusual. And as I hear climate scientists talk, I hear them say that we should expect to experience more variability, not less. So not necessarily more drought, but more variability. And I'll toss it back over to Selena or Catherine Tackley or Sean Askelson to try to answer that one more comprehensively, because I'm just the operations guy out here. Selena, you want to take a swing at that?
You're doing great, Eric. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing variability, and we are in the process of an EIS, and so we're looking at what maybe some changes in the system. So hydrologically, like Eric said, we're good about 3 days out. So it's hard to really think about the next year or 10 years. But what we do is take what we have, and we take what the weather conditions bring us, and we adaptively manage and do the best that we can with the water that we're given, and do what we can to communicate out.
I see that Mike has a request for publishing the forecasts and a little later in the spring and summer. I certainly wouldn't have any problem with that. Typically, this presentation is becomes part of the public record. It's being recorded. It is available, and it makes sense. I see another question, and I've gone off of my slides, and I'm looking at the chat. Why can't Fern Ridge stay full during the winter months? And yep, understand that. The challenge is, as I said, our forecasts are good 3 to 5 days out. Beyond that, we get speculative. And if we're in the winter months and we only have 3 to 5 days lead time, if we have a full reservoir, it takes us 4 to 6 weeks sometimes to pull that reservoir down if we continue to get rain coming in. And if we get a big storm event and we're full, we have nowhere to put that water, and we risk overtopping the structure. And then we're not performing our flood risk management mission. We wash people out downstream. We erode the channel represents the lower Long Tom between Fern Ridge Reservoir and the Willamette. We put the city of Monroe underwater, and that's an unacceptable risk that we won't take. So that's why, because we have that flood risk management mission, and in as much as I would love to fill every one of these reservoirs every year, because that gives us more options in terms of how we optimize water. We can't keep things full, or we forego that part of our mission. Yeah, so Tom's asking a question about the historic rule curve. The historic rule curve is really our risk management curve, and it's part of the authority of our projects. It's congressionally authorized. And the EIS looks at an array of alternatives. It doesn't necessarily look at changing water control diagram or rule curve, but it does give people the opportunity to comment. And so I would suggest, Tom, if you want to understand what the trade-offs are and make that comment, that's an appropriate place to comment on that. And the link there, or just going to our website, will get you there. I've heard that comment from lots of other folks as well, Tom. All right, we don't seem to have any more questions coming in. Brian? We have an SOR, Selena, on Green Peter, right?
For the spill operation. Right now, we're doing a spill operation for downstream fish passage at Green Peter that ends this weekend, and so we'll go back to normal operations, releasing water to the turbine. I'm not sure if Brian is alluding to a different operation.
I'm guessing he's not. But Brian, if you have more questions on that, glad to get you a more specific answer if we're off target.
Yeah, this is Catherine Tackley. Perhaps I can jump in on Green Peter for just a minute. There's two operations that have been considered under the injunction, spring downstream fish passage operation, as well as a fall downstream fish passage operation. Only one of those has been ordered by the judge, and that is the spring passage operation, which is what we're implementing right now. The fall operation, that plan was just submitted to the courts today, and we're anticipating an order from the judge within the next few weeks. So that fall plan is not official quite yet, but should be soon. Over.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Catherine. Selena, thank you. And Wendy in the chat. Thanks, Wendy. All right. Well, I guess in lieu of no further questions, I would really encourage you to look at our website, where there's just a ton of information there on the Portland District website. Also, the Portland District has a Facebook page, which oftentimes communicates a lot of information around our operations, what we're doing and why. And I just encourage you to use the web as much as you can to stay informed. Give us a call if you have specific questions, and we're glad to help try to explain the complexity of what we're doing anytime. All right. Hey, thanks everybody for taking time to jump into this WebEx, and it will be recorded. It will be posted on the Portland District website, so you can use it in the future. All right. Take care. Thank you.